The date was August 18th, 2025. The White House in Washington, D.C. was the center of a very important event that day. President Donald Trump, the current President of the United States, welcomed President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. Many important leaders from European countries were also there. This was a very large group of European officials, more than ever before, all gathered at the White House for a historic summit. Their main goal was clear: to end the long and terrible war in Ukraine. This war had been going on for 3.5 years. It had caused huge problems and taken many lives. Over 1 million people had died. The conflict had also changed how countries around the world interacted. Everyone at the White House hoped this meeting would bring peace. They wanted to find a way to stop the fighting and make Ukraine safe again. Ukraine's security was also very important for all of Europe. The atmosphere inside the White House was very different from a meeting earlier this year. In February 2025, President Trump and President Zelensky met before. That meeting was very bad and ended with many angry words. People were not hopeful after that February meeting. But this time, in August, there was new hope for an agreement. The leaders wanted to change things. They aimed for a peaceful future for Ukraine and for Europe. This important summit could be the start of a new way forward, moving away from the past problems and working towards a lasting peace. This contrast created a sense of suspense for everyone watching. 2. A new start. The atmosphere inside the White House was notably different on this warm August afternoon. A new feeling filled the air as President Donald Trump prepared to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This visit was meant to be a fresh start, especially after their last difficult meeting in February. That earlier meeting had been very tense. There had been strong disagreements and sharp words between the two leaders. But now, in August, the mood was calm. There were no signs of the anger that had been present before. Everyone could feel a sense of renewed hope for working together. When President Zelensky arrived, he wore a neat, dark, military-style suit. This was a clear change from his usual green army clothes, which he often wore in public. This new suit was a way to show respect, and President Trump noticed it. President Trump greeted President Zelensky with a very warm welcome. He shook his hand firmly and gave him compliments on his appearance. "You look great," President Trump said. Reporters asked President Trump what his message was for the people of Ukraine. He replied simply and strongly, "We love them. We love them." This warm welcome showed that the important friendship between the United States and Ukraine was becoming strong again after a hard period. It was clear that both leaders wanted to improve their bond. People watching could immediately see how much things had changed. During the meeting in February, Vice President J.D. Vance had spoken loudly and directly to President Zelensky. He had asked challenging questions like, "Have you said thank you once?" and had seemed to accuse Ukraine of not being thankful enough. But this time, Vice President Vance was very different. He sat quietly and remained in the background. He did not speak often and kept a calm, reserved expression throughout the discussions. His quiet presence showed how much the whole atmosphere had shifted. President Zelensky, too, had learned from the past. He chose his words very carefully, making sure to show great respect. During his public talks, he said thank you to the American people and their leaders at least 8 times. He expressed deep gratitude for all the help Ukraine had received. This polite and thankful approach helped create a smooth and positive meeting. It was clear that both President Trump and President Zelensky were ready for a new, constructive start. The hard feelings from the previous meeting were gone. This August meeting truly felt like a new chapter, bringing strong hope for a lasting peace for Ukraine and for the world. Everyone involved saw this friendly atmosphere as a very important step forward. 3. Europe stands together. After the good meeting between President Donald Trump and President Zelensky, more important guests came to Washington. 7 big leaders from Europe arrived. This was a very special event, as so many European leaders had never come together like this before in Washington. They traveled a long way to show that they all stood strongly with Ukraine. Their visit showed Europe's great wish for Ukraine to be safe. These leaders included British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, and the head of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. Also present was the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. This group represented many important parts of Europe and the Western world. Before they met with President Trump at the White House, they had their own private meeting. They met secretly at the Ukrainian embassy in Washington. In this meeting, they talked and agreed on their plan. They wanted to make sure they had a clear and single message. They worked together to show a strong, unified front to President Trump and the world. Their main message was very clear and strong. They believed that Ukraine's safety was extremely important for all of Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron told President Trump during the talks that when they discussed security for Ukraine, they were really talking about the safety of the entire European continent. Finnish President Alexander Stubb, whose country has a long border with Russia, also spoke about how vital this was for all European nations. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer added that the security of Europe and the United Kingdom also depended on Ukraine's safety. Their coming together showed how much Europe cared about finding a real peace and keeping Ukraine safe for the future. They wanted strong security promises for Ukraine. This strong unity made their voice very powerful when they spoke with President Trump about ending the long and difficult war. 4. A big promise. President Zelensky brought a big surprise to the White House meeting. Ukraine offered to buy a lot of American weapons. They wanted to spend $90 billion. This was a very large amount of money for military equipment. This huge deal was part of a new plan for Ukraine's future safety. It was actually one of the largest purchases of military equipment proposed in modern history. This plan was called a security guarantee. It meant that if Ukraine was attacked again, other powerful countries would come to help and protect it. This idea was very similar to how the NATO alliance works. In NATO, there is a rule called Article 5. It says that if one member country is attacked, all other NATO countries will act together to help. The new security guarantee for Ukraine was designed to offer this same kind of strong, collective defense against any future aggression. However, there was an important difference that made this plan unique. Ukraine would not become an official member of NATO. This was a key part of the proposed agreement. Russia had long expressed strong opposition to Ukraine joining NATO, and this had been a major point of conflict. So, this new plan was a smart way to give Ukraine powerful protection against future attacks without directly provoking Russia by joining the full alliance. It was a specially tailored agreement for defense, aiming to provide Ukraine with real security and stability. President Donald Trump listened carefully to Ukraine's significant proposal. He agreed that the United States would be part of this important security arrangement. He told reporters that there would indeed be a lot of help for Ukraine when it came to their security needs. But President Trump also made it clear that European countries would bear the primary responsibility and would lead this defense effort. He explained that because European nations are geographically closer to Ukraine, they would effectively serve as the first line of defense. The United States would then work closely with these European countries to coordinate all the necessary help and make sure Ukraine was safe and secure. This big promise of a security guarantee included many different kinds of support for Ukraine. It specifically talked about providing more weapons, offering training for Ukrainian soldiers, and sharing vital intelligence information. It also involved strong cooperation from big countries like the United States and Ukraine's key European allies. This significant step brought new hope for ending the long and difficult war, clearly showing a practical path towards a lasting peace for the country. 5. A surprise from Russia. President Donald Trump held a big secret. He chose to share it during the important White House summit. Just 3 days before, on August 15, President Trump had met Russian President Vladimir Putin. Their meeting took place in Alaska. During that private talk, Putin said something truly surprising. He agreed that Ukraine could receive security guarantees. This was a very important and unexpected change in Russia's position. For a long time, Russia had strongly opposed any Western countries giving security promises to Ukraine. They believed such agreements were a direct threat to Russia's own interests and safety. This past opposition was a major problem, stopping any real progress in peace talks. But now, with Putin's agreement to these guarantees, a big obstacle was gone. President Trump called this agreement a very significant step towards peace. He felt much hope that a deal could be made to stop Russia from attacking Ukraine again in the future. After the main meetings at the White House, President Trump took another important action. He picked up the phone and called President Putin directly. Their phone call lasted for about 40 minutes. During this conversation, Trump began to arrange a direct meeting. This meeting would be between President Putin of Russia and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. Trump later shared this news on his social media platform, Truth Social. He wrote that he had started to make the plans for this special meeting. The exact location for it was not yet decided. A Russian official, Yuri Ushakov, also confirmed the phone call. He told the media that both leaders, Putin and Trump, supported the idea of direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. This proposed direct meeting would be very historic. It would be the very first time that President Putin and President Zelensky would speak face-to-face since the war began. All previous talks had been through other people. This showed a completely new and hopeful path for ending the long and difficult war. President Trump also mentioned that after this first meeting, there would be a trilateral summit. That summit would include himself, President Putin, and President Zelensky working together for peace. 6. Hard problems. The leaders faced very hard problems. The most difficult one was about Ukrainian land. Russia still held parts of Ukraine. President Donald Trump spoke about these areas. He suggested that Ukraine might need to accept the current lines where soldiers were fighting. This meant Ukraine might not get all its land back. Inside the Oval Office, there was a map. It showed which parts of Ukraine Russia held. President Zelensky looked at the map. He said, "I'm thinking how to take it back." President Trump replied, "We'll get you one." This showed how different their ideas were. For Ukraine, giving up land was a very big problem. Ukrainian law said that people had to vote in a special way if land was given away. This was called a referendum. Russia also had demands. They wanted Ukraine to say that Crimea, a part of Ukraine, belonged to Russia. They also wanted Ukraine to accept that other parts of eastern Ukraine were theirs. Russia also wanted Ukraine to promise not to join NATO. They wanted Ukraine to be neutral, meaning it would not join any big military groups. Another big problem was about fighting. Should the fighting stop before peace talks, or could talks happen while the war continued? This caused a big argument among the leaders. Some European leaders, like German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, said the fighting must stop first. Merz said, "I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire." He believed a ceasefire, a stop to fighting, was needed before more talks with Russia. But President Trump had a different idea. After his meeting with Russian President Putin in Alaska, Trump changed his mind. Before, he wanted fighting to stop immediately. Now, he said a ceasefire was not needed first. He said, "I don't think you need a ceasefire. We can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting." This idea made European leaders worried. They thought that if the fighting continued, Russia could win more land. This would make Russia stronger in the talks. But President Trump thought that stopping the fighting could make things worse for one side. So the leaders had very different ideas on how to move forward with peace. These hard problems made the path to peace very difficult and unclear. 7. More than war. The leaders at the White House talked about more than just military plans and borders. They focused deeply on the people most affected by the long war. A very important topic was bringing all prisoners of war back home. Many soldiers had been captured, and their families waited for their return. President Zelensky asked for help with this. He knew that getting these people back was a big step towards healing a nation torn by conflict. These individuals had suffered greatly, and their safe return offered hope to countless families. Another urgent issue was the thousands of Ukrainian children. These children had been taken from their homes and moved to Russia against their will. This was a very sad and sensitive situation. The leaders wanted to bring these children back to their families in Ukraine. Melania Trump, the First Lady, had even written a letter to President Putin about these children. This showed how important this humanitarian issue was to the American side. President Donald Trump talked about this with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They both agreed that every child taken by Russia must be returned to their rightful homes and families. The International Criminal Court had even called the forced movement of these children a war crime, making their return a matter of justice. During the summit, the leaders also thought carefully about how the world would see their meeting. They wanted to show everyone that they were working together and making progress. They held special photo opportunities, like a formal family photo in a grand hall at the White House. This picture showed all the leaders standing together, looking unified and determined. When they spoke to reporters, they chose their words carefully. They focused on what they agreed on, not their disagreements. President Trump used his social media platform to talk about the progress, saying that his way of talking was finally helping to end the fighting that had gone on for years. European leaders also spoke to the media, making sure to express their strong support for Ukrainian security, while also hinting that hard choices might be needed for peace. The NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, said that if they handled things well, the war could truly end. This careful way of speaking helped to make people feel more hopeful about the peace talks. 8. What happens next? The big meeting at the White House was a historic moment for the world. President Donald Trump, President Volodymyr Zelensky, and the 7 important European leaders came together. They showed new hope for peace in Ukraine after a terrible war. This war had lasted 3.5 years. More than 1 million people had died, and millions more had to leave their homes. Now, after this summit, there is a real chance for the fighting to stop and peace to begin. The leaders made some very important steps. President Trump talked with President Vladimir Putin, and, surprisingly, Putin agreed that Ukraine could have security guarantees. This was a big change in Russia's position. It removed a major problem for peace talks. Ukraine also made a big offer to buy $90 billion worth of American weapons. This deal would help Ukraine stay safe and strong in the future, even if they are not part of NATO. The European leaders also showed very strong support. They traveled together to Washington, showing that Europe stands as one with Ukraine. This unity was new and important for the peace process. However, the road to peace is still very long and hard. Many difficult problems are still there. One big challenge is about the land. Russia still holds parts of Ukraine. What will happen to this land? Ukraine wants all its land back. But for peace, some leaders think Ukraine might need to accept the current battle lines. This is a very difficult decision for Ukraine and its people. Another challenge is trust. Can everyone truly trust Russia's promises? Russia has broken agreements before, so new security guarantees must be very strong. They must truly protect Ukraine from any future attacks. There were also hard talks about a ceasefire. Some European leaders wanted the fighting to stop before more peace talks. But President Trump believed that talks could happen even while some fighting continued. Beyond land and security, there are human problems. Getting all prisoners of war back to their families is very important. Also, bringing back thousands of Ukrainian children who were taken to Russia is a top goal. These humanitarian issues are a big part of the peace process. If a peace deal finally happens, it will change the world. It will stop a very deadly war in Europe. It will show that countries can work together, even after many disagreements and a long conflict. But if the talks fail, the war could go on, causing even more suffering and global problems. The next few weeks will be very important. They will show if this August meeting was the true beginning of lasting peace. What do you think will happen next for Ukraine and its people after this historic summit?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.